Some people rock and some people roll. Some will make you giggle right down to your soul. So talk to the world and introduce them to you. And look at me now, I'm all Barbara and you. You gotta take a step inside the shoes of another. Get to know your neighbor, get to know one another. So talk to the world and introduce them to you. And look at me now, I'm on Barbara and you.
Well, look at me now, I'm on Barbara and you. You've heard me say this before. That's kind of a long, long time ago, but Will Darkangelo did such a good job writing it for me, and we like hearing it. And we also love it that you're watching our show tonight. And I am very excited, especially about tonight's guest. You know, if you watch with any regularity, that I love to interview authors. And this lady has authored a book that truly kept me spellbound, and it was a page turner, and I couldn't stop. Her name is Sarah Schley, and the book is called BrainStorm. And there's going to be a lot of things I think you will learn from listening to our interview. And she's got so much to say that I've got her here for the whole hour. So don't go away. Sarah Schley, I'm so glad to see you. We had to make some changes along with the scheduling over the past few months, but we're here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Barbara. It's delightful to be here with you.
Well, it is my privilege, and as I said, there's so many things I just want to ask you about, and I was so fascinated by the content of your book, which is pretty heavy content. And I think you were very bold to have written your book, and you can help a lot of people. So I think it's so much, I just bought 2 extra books today to give away.
Fantastic.
But my first question is, why the title BrainStorm?
The title, if you're looking at a piece of paper, it'd be brain with a capital B and storm with a capital S. So it's really a play on words around brainstorm, like, we have great ideas, but a storm in the brain. And that's my experience of when I'm having what I call a bipolar flare. It's like a storm in the brain. So that's the title. And then there's a subtitle that's important too.
Right. From broken to blessed on the bipolar spectrum. And I do think you were clever to do that, use that as a title, but I thought she does realize that could have a double meaning. Of course you did. And the other thing that first impressed me at the beginning of your book was the fact that you knew you had a story to tell, but you didn't want to tell it until your twins were old enough and it was okay with them. Would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a big part of the book, or purpose for the book, is to destigmatize bipolar in particular, and all kinds of mental health issues, and at large. And in my case, I guess we didn't really talk because it says from broken to blessed on the bipolar spectrum. I live with a bipolar brain. And there's a huge stigma around mental illness and bipolar specifically in our country, I think, still. And so I wanted my kids to be old enough to kind of have the agency to say, it's okay with us, Mom. And so I actually waited until they were 15 to tell them about what I'm dealing with in particular anyway.
But they had grown up with their mom having some sort of a disorder. I don't know how much they knew or how they reacted or how you felt raising your children. Well, yeah. I do know for some from the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. I think the way that my bipolar shows up, and it's a big piece of the book, again, the bipolar spectrum. I have bipolar without mania. And part of the reason I wrote the book is to illuminate that, which is a whole story for us to talk about. But as a result, I don't have big manic flares that would be scary, I think, for a kid. When my bipolar is up, it's a severe, severe depression, incapacitating kind of depression. And I think thanks to my wonderful husband, I have to say that for Joe, and many other supports that I was fortunate enough to have in place, I don't think they suffered as much as they might have. Mm-hmm. And I went years being quite well because my diagnosis came at age 4. So I was able to, when they were 4, right? So when they were 4 and a half, no, I was 40-something.
Yeah, because I wrote down
they were 4-ish when I got my diagnosis. So I think that they didn't suffer too much. We can talk to them about it because they were supported by other adults in our life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That one of my questions was, when were you diagnosed? And then they were still youngsters, toddlers.
Pretty young, yeah.
And I also remember you in the beginning talking about your own childhood, and you made some discoveries there.
Yeah, I mean, that was another piece I say early on, was that it was kind of important for me, for my parents to be in the next world before I was ready to come forward with this memoir. There's a good chunk of my mom's story in this book because she also suffered from severe, severe depression. She's from Worcester, up the street. And she was a dignified lady, and I wasn't sure that that was something that she would want, to be known. Before she died, I had written the first drafts of the manuscript, and I asked for her permission, and she did give me her blessing to tell the story, yeah, because she didn't want people to suffer the way she had.
Well, and I think you must, and I think you alluded to it in the book when you asked your twins how they felt about it. They felt that you should tell the story to help other people.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I mean, I opened the book that way because I love this story, being that when I was finally ready to come out with a book, to really see how they felt about it. And I'm not going to give it away because it's in the prologue, right? The whole story. But we were on a long drive down to Florida, and the kids were in backseat, front seat. They were about 16 at the time, and I started to tell them my dilemma, which was, should I come forward with this book? On the one hand, I could help people and maybe save lives and maybe end the stigma. On the other hand, there is this stigma. Would they be concerned about, people knowing that their mom had bipolar or anything like that? In unison, same time, simultaneously, go for it, Mom. It's the most important thing you could do. And then they went on to say, don't worry about the stigma. That's your generation. Our generation doesn't care the way you guys do. We know people who, are challenged. We learn about that in health, in health class.
I've been made aware of that recently with my grandson's friends and being around lots of teens. And I also had a therapist. I heard a therapist say this. This generation, any sort of mental illness is not considered a stigma.
Yeah, they're much more tolerant than we were.
My grandson might come home from school and mention the name of one of his friends I know and say, she's in the hospital for a mental problem.
Yes.
In the psych ward is what he would say. And it's like, yeah, she had on a pair of blue shoes today or something, which is a good thing, right?
Well, absolutely. It's not a good thing that we have this, what I call the pandemic-induced mental health tsunami. But
Right.
It is a good thing that increasingly we're destigmatizing these challenges. Yeah.
And in your youth, and did you also say a grandparent had
Yes,
bipolar
my grandfather,
also?
I mean, we don't know if he was bipolar. He also suffered from severe, severe depressions. And he was a tremendous human being. He was here in Worcester. He was the president of his company. He was a guy who did the fundraiser to bring UMass Medical to Worcester. He was chairman of this and chairman of that and beloved in his community. But he also suffered from this demon of dark, dark depression. And that was totally kept closeted. No one knew, And so there's a whole story there about my grandfather. But I dedicate the book to my grandfather and my mom and everyone else who might suffer from these kinds of challenges.
But you also seem to have recalled some sad times of yours not understanding what was wrong with Mom and why I could go off by myself and nobody noticed.
6. Yeah, right. I did. I do some kind of flashbacks in the book where I'm 6. I'm 6 years old. This summer we're in Cape Cod. And my mom is really sick. And, I go off on my little bicycle. We call it, back in those days, life before safety, and kids would just go off all day and the parents wouldn't know where they were. And I'd just be gone all day, and I didn't know why Mom wasn't capable, of taking care of me in that way at that moment. But, she was really sick.
Now, your book is, you said it was about a year ago that this came out?
January 22, yeah, just over a year.
Okay, and what kind of feedback have you gotten so far?
Well, I think I got to wind the tape back for a second, Barbara, on that question, if you don't mind, because I was terrified to write this book. I wasn't terrified to write it. I was terrified to publish it. And why? Because of the stigma. And again, I think probably if the next generation was publishing this book, they wouldn't care less, but my heart would pound every time I would think about putting it out there, because there's like fear of annihilation, fear of would I lose my friends, fear of would I lose my clients. I had a sustainability consulting business for many years. And so I really was resisted. But at one point, and again, it's in the opening chapters of the book, I finally decided it was time. And I was still scared. I ended up doing a GoFundMe type of thing to help raise money to publish the book and for the audiobook. And in order to do that, I had to let people know I was going to do this project and put it out there. Without exception, I got such tremendous support in response, both to the idea of the book and the book itself. of people saying, you know, thank you so much for your courage, thank you for your vulnerability, you're showing me the way. My mother, my brother, my sister, my uncle has this too. You know, how can I help? It was a beautiful, beautiful response. And I didn't realize how many really decades of shame I was carrying. And the more I got this response, it's like it melted off of me.
So would you say that writing the book has been therapeutic for you?
Writing surely was, absolutely. No question that the writing the book was therapeutic. And partly I'll tell you why. It was a therapist who told me I had to, and we can talk about that in a minute. But the actual writing was hugely therapeutic. What I didn't know was how therapeutic it would be to come public with the story. And that continues. That continues.
And I noticed throughout your good days and your bad days, you have maintained very close friendships. And you mentioned in the book how often a friend came to your rescue or watched the kids when you weren't up to it or things like that. And that says a lot for you.
Yeah, my husband says I haven't lost a friend since kindergarten. I don't know why. I'm lucky. I mean, the thing is, in between my difficult periods are very stable periods. It's not everybody has the same kind of bipolar. So I'm able to really, yes, sustain relationships over a long term. And where we live, I live a little bit further west of here. I have a women's group that's been going for close to 30 years. 9 of us. We spend a half day together once a month on a Sunday, and those women showed up big time. Yeah.
This is a sexist statement, warning. But women tend to form those kind of friendships, I think, more than most men. Not saying there are some who have those kind of friendships, but I have friends from the first grade.
Right.
And
exactly.
whenever I get back home in Cincinnati, we all get together. There could be 20 of us at a luncheon or something. But it's just different kinds of friendships from what you have with your family and other girlfriends. I don't want to jump too far ahead because I don't want you to give away the book, but I want to tell the story, or want you to tell the story. But there must have been an awful lot of confusion. And I was also taken by your titles of different chapters. And right now I'm looking at brutality of the day-to-day. Explain that and why you chose that to be a chapter.
You know, Barbara also did a TED Talk, and so I have like my whole TED on this topic I can share with you. But really what it was and what it is that I wanted somebody who's suffering with this kind of neurodivergent brain like mine to understand that somebody else understood what it was like to be inside their brain, right? You're not alone, because I couldn't find that. I finally did find it in a memoir called An Unquiet Mind by Kay Jameson later. But to read somebody that goes, wow, I'm not alone, that was one reason I wanted to tell this piece. The other reason is to kind of try to explain to someone like you, I assume you haven't had this kind of experience, what's it like? How do I describe that? Because when people think about depression, they think, oh, maybe she's sad. Oh, I could ask you, when you hear the word depressed, what do you think? Maybe sad, you might connect it to emotion. But for me, with my bipolar, when that bipolar switch flips, it's much more like my brain stops working. It's a physical thing. And so it's like a brain breakdown. And I wanted to describe that to people so they get how excruciating it is to live with that kind of brain. And I give different examples. Like one day, it literally took me 3 hours to unpack 2 bags of groceries. I get lost between the tomatoes and the cereal. I can't sequence things. I can't choose peanut butters in a peanut butter aisle. One of the things I later find out about bipolar is we tend to be pretty smart when we're doing well. So I had 800s in math, and now I can't do my multiplication tables. Everything's confused, and it's this jumble where you can't sequence actions. You can't do the dishes. Things pile up as a result. So I really wanted people to understand, try to get from the inside what that's like.
But you're on the other side of the fence now. You couldn't recognize those things when they were happening. Why?
I could recognize how excruciating it was. And as somebody who's very high functioning when I'm well, it's even more excruciating. Because you know what it's like to be a high functioning gal, and all of a sudden you can't add 2 + 3. It's very, very, very painful. Yeah.
And like anything else in life, until you walk in somebody else's moccasins, you can't really understand. And so I can hear you, and I would agree that the people who know that they are bipolar. Oh, and I want you to also explain the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do that. We'll do that now. I think I'll
Okay.
remember my next
Okay.
question.
So one of the reasons I wrote the book also was because the subtitle, it says BrainStorm, from broken to blessed on the bipolar spectrum. And I'm going to say to you, Barbara, have you ever heard of a bipolar spectrum?
No.
No,
That's
exactly.
right.
Well, it turns out there is one. And like, you might be familiar with an autistic spectrum or a sexuality spectrum, like many other things in life on planet Earth as a human, there's a spectrum. It's not just bipolar 1. Bipolar Roman numeral 1 is like when you think bipolar, sort of the classic manic depression, I think, comes to people's mind. Big highs, big mood swings, extreme behaviors, all-night sprees. And that's bipolar 1, but that's only articulating one end of the bipolar spectrum, right? This extreme with extreme highs of mania. Bipolar 2 is what I have, does not manifest as extreme mania. We don't exhibit extreme mania, full-blown mania, or those irresponsible behaviors. So it's very difficult for a doctor to diagnose this properly. You have to know to look for it. So I have high energy. I'm more high energy than the average person probably. But it's difficult to diagnose, and I can tell you how I was diagnosed later. Super important for people to understand, primary care physicians, nurse practitioners, psychiatrists, therapists, that this bipolar spectrum exists. There's bipolar without mania. Really? I didn't know that was possible. Yeah, there is. And people like me with bipolar 2 without mania actually respond to bipolar specific medications really well. I'm doing great.
For the audience, not for me, because I understand. No, kidding, folks. For the audience, define mania.
Okay, so, wow, that's a great question. I think mania, as I understand it, is that sort of extreme high, if you will, behavior, right? If somebody says they're manic. Now, that gets used as an adjective, a lot now in common parlance, but as a technical term, or as I think as a psychiatric term, and I'm not a psychiatrist of any kind, it is that the extreme highs, the all-night sprees, the maybe it's a big energy. It's a lot of energy. And I think that is easier for a physician, a family member, somebody else to be able to identify and diagnose, because they're often irresponsible or dangerous behaviors that correspond with that.
And when they talked with you and were trying to figure out what was wrong with you, if you'll pardon me, that wasn't.
You don't see that.
That wasn't the case.
No, you don't see that.
How did they?
So how they did was that it took 5 psychiatrists, 25 years, and 7 medications for me to finally get this diagnosis that saved my life of being bipolar 2 on the bipolar spectrum. It's not easy if you don't know what to look for. So the 5th psychiatrist that I went to, bless his heart, Dr. Perlman, Northampton, he's like 80, he's about to retire. He deserves to. He's given a lot to this profession and to people like me. Dr. Perlman had dedicated himself to understanding the complexity of bipolar. He thought that was important for his patients. So he's done a lot of research, gone every year to the International Society of Bipolar Disorders conferences, et cetera, et cetera. And he knew that this bipolar spectrum existed, and that someone, a psychiatrist or physician of any type, when someone walks in their office with depressive symptoms, you look depressed. You're listless. You don't have any more joy in life. You might have suicidal ideation. You don't care about anything. You don't want to get out of bed. Classic depression symptoms, screen that person for bipolarity. Because in a high degree of the cases, could be a quarter, could be a third, could be a fifth, of those people who show up depressed in your office actually have some form of bipolarity.
But there are people who just get depressed as well.
Yes, that would be the other end. They're just
Right.
unipolar depression. But the problem is that a lot of folks with bipolar depression are misdiagnosed with unipolar depression, given the classic SSRIs, like Prozac, Lexapro, antidepressants, and that can make them worse.
Well,
like it did for me.
Right, and like you said, it took 25 years to get yourself straightened out with the help of the number 5.
Number 5, yeah.
Now we alluded that any sort of mental illness is not considered this. It's not considered as much of a stigma as it was years ago, where it was hidden.
Yes.
Now it's opened up. But then that has to change for the medical field as well. And they have to treat it accordingly. And I think, from what I read, there were times when perhaps you were just given one more drug and not treated as you should have been.
Yeah, and that was by a group of psychiatrists. But I think you're onto a really important point, my friend, which is another reason for the book, and we can talk later about a film that we're making. But that is that, okay, the greatest percentage by far, like 80% I think, of psychiatric concerns will show up first, where do you think? In your doctor's office, in your nurse's office, in your coach's office. People don't go to psychiatrists. For one, you can't find one. If you're looking at, I did the math at one point, and I found that in this country, I believe, is one psychiatrist for every 13,000 people.
Wow.
And there's this massive lack. And most of the folks are on the coast, so good luck everywhere in the middle. Point is that either because they're not available, there's a scarcity of psychiatrists, or because of the stigma, I'm not going to a psychiatrist. People end up beginning their concerns in their doctor's office. I can't get out of bed, I don't want to do anything. This doctor is a primary care physician who's a beautiful person and only wants to help this person in front of them, the me. How much psychiatric training did they get in med school? 0, 1 month. My niece just went through family care practice residency, right? During med school, she said they got 1 month. So regular doctors, PCPs, primary care, or nurse practitioners, PAs, they just don't have the training. So if somebody comes to the office, looks depressed, and they don't know about the bipolar spectrum, this person has got to be depressed. Let's write them a script for Prozac. Nope.
Well, is it because psychiatry takes a lot more education for the doctors who are going to be acting psychiatrists?
Yes,
is that
it's
why
another bunch more years,
yeah,
of course.
So
yeah.
that's why there's a shortage of them, if you would?
Well, there is a shortage, I think, because either people don't go into that specialty, or who knows why there's a shortage. And there's an issue there also, because psychiatrists need to understand better this whole bipolar spectrum. Many do, some don't. 4 out of 5 didn't get it right for me. But again, because most people are not going to start with a psychiatrist, they're going to start in primary care office. The psychiatrists that I've been working with closely now for the book and for the upcoming film, their mantra is to regular PCPs or regular nurses, screen for bipolarity, screen for bipolarity, screen for bipolarity, because this person standing in front of you who looks like they might be depressed, good chance they could have bipolar.
Well, can you define how they screen for it?
Yeah, there's a 1-page screen. I mean, it's not hard.
Okay,
So
tell us
you just
about
have to be willing to ask you have to have the lens or the mental model to know to ask the question. So in my case, the guy that finally diagnosed me, he used the 1-page screen. It's called Bipolar Spectrum Diagnostic Scale. It's available in the public domain. I got it on my website now. You could go to my website or find it anywhere. Any doctor could have it in his waiting room, and people could be filling it out while they're in the waiting room. But basically, it's only about 10 or 11 questions, but you got to know to ask them. So my guy who knew, he looks at me, he sees, oh, okay, she's depressed. Nothing's been working. She was on antidepressants, don't seem to be working. Let's get out the Bipolar Spectrum Diagnostic Scale. And he says, did your first incident happen in your 20s? Well, yeah, it did. Check. And do you have any family history of mood swings? Yep, my mother, my grandfather, they suffered terribly from this. And when you were given an antidepressant, did it seem to work but then make you worse or make you more irritable? Did anybody in your family talk about that? You know, that you were more irritable? Well, yeah, it made me worse. And my husband said, suddenly I had a hair trigger temper. That's not my personality. Okay, so those 3 questions and about 2 more, he goes, check, we know what you have.
Wow.
25 years later.
That almost sounds too...
10 minutes.
Yeah, that sounds too simplistic.
It sounds too easy, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, it's not hard. Do it. So, so we have now, this area is brilliant, right? We have brilliant people in Massachusetts. And right over here in Worcester, is Dr. Nancy Byatt. She's at UMass Medical, and she's what they call a perinatal psychiatrist. So she works with women in the pre-pregnancy and post-pregnancy era. And in that time, there's a lot of postpartum depression, as we know.
Right.
And some dangerous stuff has happened recently in Massachusetts, some tragic situations with postpartum depression. So what Nancy describes is that, I'm pretty sure I got this right, she'll say 1 out of 5, it may be higher, of those women who have postpartum depression actually have some form of bipolar. So she's been trying to educate OBGYN offices, obstetric and gynecology offices, that when those women come in, not only screen for depression, but screen for bipolarity, right? And in the past, OBGYNs haven't wanted to do that because what am I going to do if I find out somebody's bipolar? I don't know how to deal with this. Well, what Nancy's created is they're kind of like mission control. It's called MCPAP for moms, MCPAP. And OBGYN practices that sign up for this thing can then have her on call as kind of like mission control. So my OBGYN, it turns out by coincidence, I didn't know this, is in the program. We're out in Western Mass in Greenfield, right? If my doctor's Dr. Polonsky, fabulous, Pioneer Women's, Greenfield, if they screen somebody positive for bipolar in that little test I just mentioned to you, they call up Nancy and they say, this is what I got. They have ABCD questions, right? What do I do? And they have a psychiatrist on call to support that and help them prescribe.
That is amazing. I'm glad you told us about it.
So Dr. Polonsky, we interviewed her for this upcoming film, and she says to the camera, it's easy. Tell people it's easy. She's been in practice as an OBGYN for 30 years.
Oh, I ask her to
You got to
email
come
me.
in, right?
Yeah, I definitely want to interview her.
Or Nancy Byatt, if you can get Dr. Byatt. You get the two of them together. It's fabulous.
Wow. Yeah, remind me of that. And the other thing I want to be sure to mention is this disease of the brain, for want of a better term, is not to be confused with someone who has a brain injury.
No, it's not the same.
Totally different.
No. The bipolar, I say that I live with bipolarity. I live with a bipolar brain on the bipolar 2 spectrum. I say brain on purpose because I like to say, look, if you had, if you needed insulin, if you had diabetes, you might take insulin. If you need an inhaler because you had asthma, you'd use the inhaler. If you had heart disease, you might take blood thinners. Pancreas, heart, lungs, these are all physical organs. So is the brain. Why should we treat diseases of the brain differently? Why should we be prejudiced against those folks? So I say bipolar brain on purpose. But yeah, no, it's a different thing. It's genetic to a large degree. There are other dynamics that are going on. It's not a brain injury.
And reading your book, and so many parts of it were extremely fascinating, but you were always kind of an overachiever, and they must have been torturous for you to have those moments when you can't decide which peanut butter to pick off the shelf.
Brilliant, brutal, brutal, brutal. Yeah, I mean, I started my TED Talk saying I was a senior at Brown University down in Providence. I had a 4.0 in science. I was off to med school. I was playing varsity sports. I had my whole gang of feisty friends. I was like riding high. And then boom, it just happened. Like the switch flipped. And my whole life, the rug came out from under me, and I was like in a tailspin, heading straight for the dirt with absolute terror because I had no idea what was happening.
And a lot of people, if they had been in that same position, they wouldn't have found the way out. It may have taken you a long time, but you found the way out.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I'm lucky. I don't know.
But there must have been times where you just thought, I've got to conquer this.
Well, the thing is, so everybody's different again. In bipolar 2, the depressions tend to be very long. So mine would go for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months. And during those 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months, I never thought I was going to get better. Because when you're in the bipolar brain, or the depressed brain is telling you you're not going to get better. So it's very difficult, like moment to moment. But I say, by the time I had my kids, even though I was maybe in living hell, I had to stay on planet Earth, because I didn't want to leave them with a legacy of a mother who had taken her own life, though I do not judge it, because I understand why that might happen. You
did have thoughts of taking your own life.
Sure.
Many times.
I wasn't the person who had the courage to go through with it. I mean, or something, but it wasn't so much that I had a plan. It was so much that it would be less excruciating to not be here anymore.
Wow, that's very heavy.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump ahead to the back of the book, but we can still talk about some of the middle part. But I was fascinated by, now that you're being treated properly, you're controlling everything, you have your personal ritual that you go through every day.
Yeah, I got a lot of them.
I found that so interesting, and I found I need to do some of those things you mentioned.
Yeah, amen. You want me to talk about PECs?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is good. When I do my TED Talk, I said, but these things I'm going to tell you are good for anyone with a brain. Because raise your hand if you're not feeling any stress out there these days. Anybody got a hand up in the audience? We're all feeling tremendous stress. So the silver lining, if you will, of dealing with this brain pattern that I have is that I've learned that I have to do a lot of good preventive medicine. And I call them practices for a healthy brain, PECs, flex your PECs. So it's physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual, that's PECs. And as we've been doing research for the film, and we've talked to like 30 scientists, more about that later, I'm learning the science behind what I'm doing that really supports why these things are so important. For example, circadian rhythms are absolutely key. You have to be steady about when you go to sleep and when you wake up, because light is key, and all of that is certain. Mitochondria in a bipolar brain are more sensitive to the light, whatever it is. I have to be really disciplined about that. Another one is amber glasses. What are the amber glasses? There's all this research that says that if you let the blue light from the screens get into your eyes after a certain hour, it's going to keep you up way into the middle of the night because it's messing up your natural melatonin. So if you're going to look at screens, put the amber glasses on. But anyway, I can tell you the PECs, physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual. So every day, you want to go into them in detail?
Absolutely.
Okay, Barbara, this is your homework now. This is your
I'm
assignment.
I'm
this
taking
is your
notes.
assignment. So you have to do what works for you, not what works for me. But on the physical, it's something aerobic, right? It's like you got to get moving because aerobics are good endorphins. And so my main ones are hiking and swimming, biking, depends on the season, and the winter skiing. Also stretching, yoga. For emotional social, we know that human beings we're social beings. COVID was tough because we're not meant to be in isolation. And so, need to make connections. So actual, not just texting, but actual person, like you and I are having right now, so much better than on Zoom. But I say if you want to be efficient, go for a walk with a buddy, physical and emotional. And then creative things are anything that engages that other side of your brain, which is like, it could be dancing, could be drawing, could be writing. I'm a writer, I like to write. Could be cooking, could be singing. Whatever it is that sort of makes you more expansive in your thinking. And then the last one, spiritual, you may be a religious person or not. It is what's going to connect you to something greater than yourself. So for me, I like to get outside. I moved to the woods on purpose. Later, I found out that's good for a bipolar brain. But I think that we need to disconnect from technology to reconnect with nature. And so get outside, breathe, pray, meditate, whatever you do to connect you to something larger than yourself.
You didn't mention my favorite part.
What was that?
Take a nap.
Oh, yeah. Well, napping is key. You got to have a power nap. That's part of physical. There's a lot of science around power naps. When we're done, I'm going to take my power nap before I drive home.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
18 minutes.
They work for me. Well, and yeah, you hear that more than 20 minutes is
it's got to be under 30.
Right. It's not.
There's a whole thing about power napping that helps. Like I call it a vacuum cleaner to suck up the metabolic waste in your brain. I'm sure that's a technical term, but it's really good for you. And then I also unplug one day a week. But that's a different book. So I'll come back to talk about my Sabbath book.
Okay, now we have to watch it. We don't run out of time, which I feared as we were planning this, because I want to hear about the film.
Okay,
sure. You want to do it now?
As you wish.
Okay.
Should we talk a little bit about the film?
Yeah, I just don't want us to leave it out.
Okay. So, all right. So fun talking with you, Barbara. You're great.
Oh, thank you. I love what I do.
I know, it's wonderful.
And I meet interesting
I
people
could see 30
like
or 40 years or whatever. So, okay. My mission in this book is to transform sort of the landscape of bipolar as we know it. If I was going to come out, so to speak, in quotes, I want to come out big. I want to save lives. I don't want the next person that could be prevented from suffering to suffer. So let's shout from the mountaintops. Well, book's good, but wouldn't a movie be good too? So turns out one of my beloved friends of 40 years, her name's Bonnie Walsh. She's a fabulous documentary award-winning filmmaker from Boston. And we go back to college. And at one point, a kind of a reunion of friends. One of our friends was having a reunion for us up in New Hampshire. Thank you, Nancy. And I had written the the manuscript. It was in Galley's form. I didn't have the book yet. I handed copies to a bunch of friends. And
this book you
this
hadn't
book, yeah, the
started
BrainStorm.
yet. Okay.
And one of them was Bonnie, and she read it, and she was very moved by it, and she wrote me about that. So a few months later, I saw a film that she did on climate. It's called Earth Emergency, and it's a fabulous climate film. And I mentioned that my previous career for 30 years has been in sustainability, so I was very, very impressed with this climate film. Talking to her about it and bragging to my friends about her film. And later when we got together, I said, hey, Bonnie, do you think we could do, and Earth Emergency got a national PBS broadcast, which is not easy. Do you think we could do a PBS national broadcast for BrainStorm? Can we make a PBS film out of it? And she said, well, you can't make a PBS film. You got to make the best film you can and then go and see if PBS will take it. But let me ask Melanie. So who's Melanie? Melanie Wallace, her dear friend, who has been a 40-year senior producer, Emmy Award winning at Nova. And at first, Melanie thought, nah, it's Bipolar's been done. But then she read the book and she saw the TED Talk, she listened to the book, and she realized this is about a very different, the bipolar spectrum and bipolar 2, that's a story that needs to be told. So they signed on to do this. And then we got our first funding, and then we got more funding, and now we're underway.
Good, congratulations.
It's very exciting, yeah, it's wonderful.
I just told you I earmarked an awful lot of things in here. I'm going to read one sentence. Here's a law I would advocate for. Psychiatrists who prescribe drugs should be required to work in tandem with social workers / psychologists or other professional counselors.
Amazing that you picked that exact line, because I just met a psychologist. I'm going to be on a panel with him next week. And he said when he read that, he was listening in his car and he started cheering.
Really?
He said, I would like that to be law too. So why I said that was, you know, I don't know that everyone works this way, but typically psychiatrists are mostly about prescribing medication. You don't have a lot of therapy there. You might get 15 minutes with them, right? And then therapists don't know much about medication, right? They're not psychopharmacologists, and they don't know how to do that. So one of my therapists, you know, this took 25 years to diagnose, somewhere halfway down the way, was a wonderful therapist, and she came to me 10 years later after my diagnosis in tears, apologizing. She said, I didn't know this existed. I'm so sorry. She didn't know about the bipolar spectrum. The next one therapist said, you have to write this book because my colleagues don't know it exists. So anyway, point is, they live in different worlds. And when I finally got better, it was really these two wonderful therapists called Marsha Black and my doctor, Dr. Proman, working together on my case. Marsha Black, I had more of a personal connection with her because we'd have an hour and she'd hear my whole life story. And I trusted that she was kind of advocating for me with this doctor. And I trusted him because he was working with her. And the two of them, it was brilliant. It worked.
A lot of people, I think most people can benefit from seeing a therapist.
Yes.
But how in the world do you select a therapist unless you have somebody who says, oh, I went to Phyllis and she's fabulous? I mean, how do you know? And what should you be feeling the first time you meet with them? Are you feeling like they're giving you good advice? Sometimes I think the advantage there is just you get to spill your guts to somebody who doesn't judge you.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found people by word of mouth. That's the only way I've ever done it. You know, somebody will say, oh, this one's great, or this one's great. Mm-hmm. I feel like I've been blessed with really good, you know, people to talk with over the years. But the thing is that if you have a biochemical or genetic thing like I've got, in my case bipolar, therapy alone's not going to do it. You're going to need some medication, and that took me a long time to accept. Because I wasn't going to accept that. Yeah, I was not going to be that person who needed drugs. I was resistant for a long time because I had a prejudice against it. You know, I was going to do it myself.
But hadn't you had some experiences where you'd been giving some prescriptions that weren't helping you and were the wrong thing for you at the time?
Oh, that was pretty far in before I was even willing to try.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like 20 years in before I was like, okay.
And I think that's not unusual for people to say, oh, I don't need that. I'm not.
Right.
I'm
they
not
don't
like
want
so and so and whatever.
Yeah, but part of what I want to say in the book is, you know, get over the self-stigma. If you had diabetes, you would take insulin. You know, there's no shame here. Yeah, no, it's a helping hand from the Creator, you know. And this was my mentor who finally got me to accept that. She said that, you don't deserve to suffer. You've done nothing wrong here. This is physical, this is genetic. Just say yes to help. Took me a long time.
But it's not a simple thing like women all have to make sure we get our mammograms. There's no magic box that can say, oh yeah, you have this.
Correct. We've
And
got a long way to go.
That makes it much more difficult to
Yes.
get well,
Yes.
and for the doctors to diagnose.
Right. That's why we need the book, we need the film, we need more research, we need more awareness, we need less stigma.
You go get them, girl.
Amen.
You tell them.
Thank you, Barbara.
But also, have you noticed, it's just happening more and more and more on television, the pharmaceutical companies and the different products they're advertising on television, and they give you this rah-rah, everything it's going to do for you. There are names, words that no one could ever have heard before.
Yeah.
And then they tell you all the whole possible things that
Yeah.
happen, including death.
Ugh.
It's so depressing. And does anybody really fall for
Ever
those
fall for
commercials?
that? No, I think you got to turn mute on at that point
Well,
because
and they say ask your doctor.
Yeah.
But I don't know how the doctors are expected to keep track of all these different medicines.
yeah, good point. Yep.
Yeah. But I guess that's another conversation for
That's
another
another
day.
conversation, yeah.
Just randomly turning to the pages I earmarked when I was reading this. And again, I mentioned you use great titles. And this one we pretty much, I think we've pretty much talked about this already. Coming out, ending the stigma, lifting the shame.
Yeah.
We've done that. And
That's everything we're talking about right now. Yeah, yes. I mean, I love this quote from the author Terry Chaney. You're an author. She says, the disease feeds on shame, shame feeds on silence, and I will not be silent anymore.
good.
Yeah.
What other types of writing do you do?
Oh. For the next show, I wrote a book on the Sabbath, my practice of the Sabbath, the Shabbat, Secrets of the Seventh Day. So I wrote that one for a friend of mine who wanted to know how to do it. I mostly just write nonfiction, I write stories, I write humor actually. I would like to think my mentor would be, for anybody who would remember these folks, Irma Bombeck or Nora Ephron.
Oh.
Right? So they're telling stories of family life, and they're telling them with humor. Usually people are laughing when I write my stuff, except for this book. This book didn't have much funny in it.
But I love both of them. And Nora Ephron, I would say, I've interviewed her sister.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
and they were a family of, their parents were writers, and all of the children were writers. And for the life of me, I can't remember her sister's name now, but
Right.
it's on my celebrities list.
Oh, cool.
And you and I have something in common in that we both belong to writers groups.
Yes.
And anyway, I liked, my audience knows that I love to interview authors, and we try to give some advice to people who maybe have, how many people say I should write a book, but they don't do it? Or they write it and they don't do anything with it but put it in a drawer?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about the writing process a little
Sure.
bit? For me, I always have to have a buddy. That's just the way I'm wired. So whatever I do, I need a buddy. I would not have written that thing alone. I wrote in a writer's group one Monday a week for a couple of years. You know, being that I had other people in community with me, and there's something about that is very powerful.
And we've always found that with our writers group too,
Yeah.
is that bouncing it off of each other. And when I was back in the day when I was teaching, and my teacher taught me, she said, and it's best not to read your what you're currently working on. Don't read it to your family. Don't ask them to critique it, because number one, they'll either think you're wonderful and you can do no wrong, and oh honey, I love that. Or they're going to say, you're a writer, oh, get serious. One extreme or the other. And then the other thing about being in a writer's group is we're honest with each other. Because when I was teaching, I used to say, now, if you come in here and Mary reads something and everybody says, oh, Mary, that was lovely. Yes, Mary, I think other people will like that. You got to help them critique. Tell them the things that you didn't like or how they could make it better. Do you agree?
This is a whole other conversation, but the lineage I'm part of is called Amherst Writers and Artists Association. It's based out of Amherst, now all over the country. It's a little bit different. You're only invited to comment what you loved or what surprised you or what was good about the writing.
Really?
Which creates a safe space for someone to write something very vulnerable like that.
Wow.
And then later, when you're going to publish it, then you go to the editor who's going to rip it apart. But this is kind of like the embryonic safe space to give birth to something.
Okay.
I liked it. It's very good.
Well, that's another whole show
That's another
for us.
time. I'll be in like in a series with you, Barbara.
Now I'm on the chapter called The Soloist. What's that all about?
That was just, it was a movie called The Soloist with Jamie Foxx. It came out, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, where he plays this young man who's a virtuoso protege cellist, I think, or violinist in like a youth orchestra. And there's a moment in the film, right in the beginning, where he's reading the music and he can't read it anymore. And he's having what turns out to be a schizophrenic breakdown. And I'm getting chills telling you this now, Barbara. I had chills in this movie theater. I was with my husband, Joe. When I left, I had to have him like hold my hand and tell me, it's 2018, it's not 1982. You're okay, you're safe, feel your fingers. Because I had like a PTSD, not the right term, but of what happened to me when I was that age, of all of a sudden, my brain wasn't working anymore. It was terrifying. So I think I wrote about that. I haven't read it in a while, but I wrote about that story and how scary it was to go back there, but how powerful it was too.
Mm-hmm. And let me make sure that you have a chance to tell people how they can get your book.
Oh, thank you. Well, the book is BrainStorm, From Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum. You can get it just by going on basically anywhere books are sold that you like to go online, whether it's Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whoever. You can order it at your local bookstore. You can ask your library to get it. You can also go to my website, which is sarahschley.howyousspellit.com. How it's spelled on there. I think it'll be in the line.
S-C-H-L-E-Y.
S-C-H-L-E-Y.
It doesn't sound like it looks.
And people, I got to just tell a little story for the book, okay? Like I don't know, when you write your first book, it's a little bit vulnerable. Like, is anybody going to like it? So one of my favorite is I started to be introduced to these doctors, psychiatrists, academic researchers, because I'm what they call expert by experience, which is a really wonderful title for someone who has self-stigma to all of a sudden be an expert by experience. So I'm going to be on a panel with these two rock star hotshot bipolar academics, Dr. Tricia Supes at Stanford, Holly Schwartz from Pittsburgh, and they invite me to be their expert by experience, which is awesome. So this is the first time I'm going to tell my story publicly. And at that point, I had just written this. And I said to both of them, but to Dr. Schwartz, we had a kind of nice rapport. All full transparency, I've written this manuscript. Could I send you a copy? Would you mind reading it? And she says, so the way she tells the story now, flip to Dr. Schwartz, she says, so I get this thing in the mail. I'm like, oh God, I got to read it because I'm going to be in this panel with this person. It's going to bore me to tears. And she couldn't put it down. She finished it on that weekend. And she wrote me a note that said, thank you.
I felt the same way, and I should read more than I do. And I sometimes, when I'm interviewing authors, I'll just skim through and pick. I truly couldn't put it down. And it was so, my heart just went out to you. I told you when I walked in here tonight, I feel like I know you. I feel like I've known you for a long time.
We're buddies.
Because it's been a while since I read the book. But that's, I don't think you could get a better compliment than somebody saying, so I couldn't put it down.
Yeah.
Now, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure you have time to, if there's something you want to say that I haven't asked the right question or.
No, it's great. Well, let me tell you something about that we've been learning from the film that I mentioned to you that the first kind of cathartic was writing the book. The second was putting it out there, feeling vulnerable, and getting all this wonderful commentary back. The third has been, as a result of for the film, we have been collecting other people with lived experience of bipolar on the bipolar spectrum to be characters in the film. So one is this guy, Major General Greg Martin. He commanded 10,000 troops in Iraq. Phenomenal hero, right? He has this incredible bipolar story. Another one is Devika Bhushan. She's the youngest of the former acting Surgeon General of California. Okay, she's like in her 30s and an immigrant from India. Then we have the youngest ever Shark Tank winner. Okay, then we have this woman who's an ice climber and worked in the Obama White House. And there's kind of a funny story there where she's got bipolar 2 and she's like in her 20s or 30s. She goes to a psychiatrist to get her when she's going to get her diagnosis. And the woman says, and it's bipolar 2, and the woman says, where do you work? And she says, I work in the White House. She says, oh, I have a lot of bipolar patients in the White House.
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
What I'm getting at here, there's Paul English, who started Kayak, the travel app, right? And he sold it for $1.something billion with a B. He's from Boston. He's an incredible human being. He was the reason for the Martin Luther King Embrace statue down in the Common right now. So all these extremely successful, dynamic entrepreneurs and phenomenal people have bipolar. I didn't know that. I thought I was part of the loser club. I thought I was part of the people in the streets club, which I could be if I didn't have the right med. And that's okay. I have compassion for them, but we're all kind of, walking around, walking wounded. I didn't know I was part of this club with phenomenal human beings.
How did you find these people?
Well, it just started happening. The main one, I think, was Dr. Bouchon, this person who was the acting Surgeon General. In August, she wrote an op-ed in the LA Times, and it was titled, I am the acting Surgeon General of California, and I have bipolar. And my editor for that book sent it to me. She said, have you seen this? I hadn't. I read Dr. Bouchon's letter. I was like, oh my God, this is me. I have to meet this person. And we were able to connect. She was phenomenal. We're now friends. She's now part of this film team. And because she came out with this, with the LA Times op-ed, a lot of people reached out to her. She proceeded to introduce them all to us. So that's how we met the ice climber. That's how we met Major General Martin. That's how we met a bunch of other people.
Oh, yeah. What a fabulous film it's going to be.
It's going to be good. And then Paul English, the kayak guy, he started something called Bipolar Social Club, which is like a listserv. That's been wonderful support network for people. But so what we're finding is then we came to the researchers, the number of researchers who are looking at, not to coin a phrase, the upside of bipolar, the positive, the creative, the energetic, the contributing to society. So there's this whole other side to it that's really quite wonderful. And then we are looking at a lot of cutting edge science from scientists around the world who Dr. Schwartz from Pittsburgh has introduced us to, and then somebody from Harvard introduced us to somebody from Stanford who introduced us to one from Toronto, introduced us to one in Australia. And they're all a pretty tight network of bipolar researchers around the globe. They know each other, and they're all really championing this film now because they want to see it happen.
I'm in awe listening to you and looking at you. It's like you've been given another life altogether. And do you feel that you have now, do you recognize that? Do you feel that you have more energy now than you've ever had? And you've just got so much going on in your life.
I feel completely blessed. I am like wicked blessed by this whole thing. And I do feel like we can guess our age. I may or may not tell you. But, somebody said third act. So I had a pretty good career as a consultant to big corporations, right. Nike and Ford and all those, for a lot of years. But this is tremendously exciting for me and inspiring. It's, it feels like life purpose,
Well, one of your titles, I believe it's the last chapter of the book where you says, I'm bipolar 2 and a better person because of it.
Okay, I got to tell you about that.
Yes, please
do. We have time?
Do.
All right, so what this was my editor, Jennifer Margulies. So she, I told you I was scared because of the stigma and the shame and the fear to go out with this thing. So she said to me, okay, here's your homework assignment. I want you to go and write this essay. I'm bipolar and a better person because of it. And I wrote it, and it came up with 4 things. And at the end of writing that thing, I was ready to press send.
What were the 4 things?
So the 4 things, of course, I did.
Never forget.
So the 4 things, so it's like, here's again, and this was before I knew all these amazing bipolar characters. This was like trying to claim some pride. I'm not just, a mental health case, even though I have no shame and I'm not going to judge. But let's look at the pride of this thing. What's happened? Going to hell and back, being in the underworld for months and months on end. What I call the Hell and Back Club, emerging like Phoenix from the ashes, right, with life again. What happens? This kind of like crucible develops some qualities of character and soul. So one I say is emotional fearlessness. There's nothing you can do to me, Barbara, that I have not already done to myself. My brain has been telling me you don't deserve to be here. There's nothing you can bring that's going to scare me. I will not leave you as a friend. That's thing one. Another one is compassion, which is related, but for the grace of God, I could have taken my own life. I could be in the streets. I could be addicted. I am not judging you. No question. Another one is discipline, because I know what's at risk if I don't take care of myself, so I can help you with your pecs.
Right.
Right? We can go out and do our workouts together. I have a lot of knowledge that I've developed over the years of preventive medicine because I know what the risks are for me if I don't do that. And then the last one is off the charts gratitude. Because when you've been to hell and back, you know, every moment that your brain is working, that your energy is positive is a miracle.
And I know you also recognize you've got very special children, and the guy I've never met that I call Mr. Wonderful.
I got great people. Super blessed. Yeah. Super blessed.
Truly, a lot of husbands wouldn't have been patient to help you through this.
No, he's amazing. Yeah, I mean, he was. Joe, I'm Boston 5 generations. Okay, I'm a New Englander through and through, and I love my Red Sox. But that guy's a Midwesterner, and they show up. You know, it's like he was just going to show up no matter what it took, and I give him a lot of gratitude for that. And he's like, basically, I have to give it back to him now, whatever happens.
That's right.
And I have.
You owe him.
And I am. Yeah.
So when will the film be coming out, and how will we find out about it? Of course, you'll come back on my show.
So there is a BrainStormTheFilm.com, so please check us out, and you can sign up with the contact form and then get information about it. So we're hoping to go into production. That's with filming. Bonnie's our director, in the late summer, early fall, and then she says it's probably 2025. It's probably 2 years. Because
really?
you got to, first of all, we have to get PBS, all you guys from PBS that are watching, to say yes to us, or some other, you know, Apple Plus TV streaming. We got to get the distribution piece going. We have raised more than a quarter of our budget, which is amazing, but we do need to raise some more funds. If you want to donate, you can do that at BrainStormTheFilm.com. And so it's a couple years. Yeah.
Okay. But all those names you mentioned, you've got to get around to all of them and give them all time to be their part of it.
Which ones?
The names you mentioned, all those bipolar people.
Oh, they're on the film, yeah.
Yeah.
They're in the film, yeah.
But is their story already told?
Is their story already told? Mm-hmm. Well, they will be telling their story in the film. I mean, it's a documentary. What we're hoping to do is an unprecedented, coherent narrative that will combine these very exciting stories of people living with bipolar, the cutting-edge science from top bipolar docs around the world, and breakthrough treatments and wellness practices. So that's the whole gestalt of the film.
Okay, now you have one final thing to say in a half a minute. And
what do I got?
Well, if you just repeated those things that you said for yourself about not judging people and
the 4 things?
Yeah.
You want me to say it again?
Yes, I do. Unless you have something else you want to say in your 30 seconds.
What do I got left? I got to know. I might say thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, that's my pleasure.
But I have a whole other thing to tell you about how to be an ally. That's my other piece. But for people are asking, how can I help? And it's really just show up with compassion, listen without judgment, and help.
Very well said. And we'll definitely have to do another show one of these days.
I'll be back when the film is ready.
Thank you. I knew we would have a great interview, and I really appreciate your patience with us when we had to change dates. But thank you so much, and just keep up the good work, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
And let me remind our viewers who'll be with me next week. Edgar Sears has been here before. He's the chairman of the Worcester Symphony Orchestra, and they have some exciting things coming up at Mechanics Hall, I believe. And also, it's amazing how many wonderful organizations there are that I hadn't even known about. There's an RFK Community Alliance based in Lancaster, and 2 of their executives are going to come and tell us all about that next week. I'll be here. I hope you will too. This is Barbara Foster saying good night and God bless you.